Hi, everybody. Matt Yankovic, head of open source strategy at Scarf, the Hoss for short. I'm here to talk to you about building a successful open source business, one that you can make money in the open source space with. Hey, there are lots of different ways that you could go about building a business, but there are a few standard ones that most people follow. So let's jump in here and let's talk a little bit about this. Okay, so making money in the open source space is hard, but it is not impossible. All right, there are a lot of successful open source companies. There are a lot of unicorns out there, but keep in mind, there are a lot of other companies, a lot of other projects that have not been able to make a commercial success out of their open source software. Okay, and not every piece of open source is commercially viable. All right, I want to throw that out there right up front. Now, a few things. As I talk, I'm going to compare things to the music industry. Why am I comparing open source and the music industry? Because some of you may not know some of the nuances about the open source industry, and being able to compare with something that you may have on the top of your mind or you may be interested in is something that's helpful. So as I go through, keep in mind, I'll be comparing and contrasting the two a little bit and bringing some examples just to give you some references. All right, now the first thing I want to talk specifically about before I begin is open source in and of itself is not a business model. Similarly, music is not a business model, right? There are business models around music. There are business models around open source. Just because I go create a song, I go sing, I go, even record something, doesn't mean that I can make money off of it. And it's the same thing in open source. When I have open source that I want to make a commercially viable product, I have to apply some business logic and some business definition around it. So that said, okay, the first thing I want to talk about is mixing. Okay. When you are in the musician studio, there is a certain, process of mixing and producing the sounds that you hear. Right? When you get an album, when you stream something, when you listen to, something, through your kick-ass speakers that I know you all have at home, it has been produced. It has, a level of quality that you come to expect. Okay. If you just record yourself jamming in your garage, maybe some people would like that, but it probably doesn't have mass appeal. Similar in the open source space, you have to get the right mix. What does that right mix look like? First, you have to have a kick-ass product. Captain Obvious, of course you need to have a kick-ass product. But there are lots of people who have kick-ass products that aren't commercially viable. Okay? And when I talk about commercially viable, it means that somebody's willing to pay for it. There are a lot of JavaScript libraries out there that do a couple of things really, really, really well, but that doesn't mean someone's going to pay for that functionality, especially if they can replace it with something else that's free. But that kick-ass product, something that meets the needs of the consumer and the user, but also has the ability to solve a problem many people have. Okay? Captain Obvious there. If you want more details, again, you can check out opensourcemetrics.org. That's where I have a detailed presentation on this, as well as all kinds of details on various things on running an open source business. Now, if you have a kick-ass product, that doesn't mean people will come. The old adage from Field of Dreams is, if you build it, they will come. Well, in this case, if you build it, that doesn't guarantee people will come because they don't even know you exist. If you go out to GitHub, how many projects are out there? A lot of projects. Millions of projects. Millions. And all of those millions of projects that are out there, not all of them are bad. Some of them are really, really good. But you know what? A lot of people don't know which ones are or aren't. And so how do people find your product, know what software you have, know about your open source software, and figure out like, oh my God, that is awesome. I need that. Oh, it will solve these problems. You have to make them aware. And so awareness is a big part of that. So you need the kick-ass product. You need awareness. And the last one, this might sound easy, haha. It's making it easier than the competition. It's the user experience. You need a kick-ass user experience to go with your kick-ass product and that kick-ass awareness, okay? This is often overlooked by us technologists. People in the engineering space look at this and say like, I am comfortable compiling from source. I am comfortable with 300 configuration options. I am comfortable running everything on the command line. You are not the target demographic. You built your product. You didn't buy someone else's. Okay? So you have to have the right mix, the right awareness, and you have to have a kick-ass UI, UX experience. It has to be top-notch. And it has to be better than the competition. Okay. That being said, let's say you've mixed everything right. That still doesn't mean that your product is going to sell $1. So let's take a look at the music industry. How do we, consume music nowadays? How are artists making money? Okay, there's a variety of different ways, but some of the ways that they make money, okay, obviously there are streaming services now. And honestly, probably most of the music that I listen to on a plane or in the car comes from one of the streaming services right now. I haven't bought a digital copy of an album or a CD in ages, or God forbid, a cassette tape. Yes, I had cassette tapes. I had LPs too. I had records, vinyl. But vinyl's cool, so I can have vinyl. But when we talk about, the different streaming services, the idea is you pay a monthly fee, and that monthly fee gives you access to everything. If I stop paying, I lose access. And similarly, what we're seeing in the open source space is a lot of companies are moving to this as a service type of focus. It's the cloud, right? And it's a consumption-based model, a monthly subscription where we will manage your service for you and make sure it's up and running and patched and everything good about it is there. And our plan is we're going to keep you a customer for a really long time. So every month we'll get that revenue stream coming in, and then we will try to expand you. Okay. And expansion in this term is all about trying to get a customer or a customer finding so much value. They love you so much, they start to deploy more of you. So, I am a fan of Postgres. I'm a fan of MySQL. I'm a fan of databases. So let's use Postgres as an example. You install one Postgres server. You get, let's say, $20 a month for that Postgres server. Everybody's happy with it. We have a new website. We're going to add a new Postgres server. Well, we're going to add another one, and then another one, another one. That's that expansion play. Now, it could come in other forms. Sometimes it's bigger instance sizes. Sometimes it's, different storage sizes. There's some sort of like meter or measure that you're going to use there. All right. So as a service is a super popular model. There are some drawbacks and some positives. One of the drawbacks that I want to talk to you a little bit about is if you think about like from an individual artist, if as an open source person, I am like a musician, all right, and I am creating music. It is difficult as an individual artist to have enough appeal to offer my own streaming service. Now, I might be able to do it. Maybe I'll throw some documentaries in there and some behind the scenes tours and some, like some other things that you can exclusively get through my streaming service. But ultimately, my streaming service, my open source software, if you will, is going to be one of the bigger players who probably has more clout. So, if I'm an individual musician, maybe my music's on Apple Music. Okay, I'll get potentially a royalty from that because that's how that works. But in the open source space, the big cloud providers don't necessarily have to pay you a royalty. It depends on if you have negotiated a partnership with them, if you're offering them some special secret stuff behind the scenes. There are ways that you can influence that. But ultimately, if you are running your own as a service on the side and it's a pure open source play, it's often difficult for those companies to compete with some of the bigger cloud providers, because when I think music, when I think I'm going to go to someplace, I'm going to go to one place that has all the music. I'm not going to go to 20 different, artists' web pages and subscribe to each of their services separately. It's the same thing in tech, right? In the tech space, in the open source space, if I need a database, I could go to the database vendor. That's awesome. But what if I need a different type of database? Okay, well, now I got two vendors that I'm dealing with. And what if I need, something special on the SSO? Oh, I'm going to go to this other place. So you have this kind of explosiveness around the number of vendors that you could have, and that provides a negative user experience for some people because they want less. It's a viable option, and a lot of companies are successful with as a service, but there are some drawbacks and there are some issues that you might have to deal with, and it might be limiting depending on how you implement it. So keep that in mind. But as a service, very standard, very concrete, and It's the fastest growing of all these models that I'm going to talk about. Everybody loves it because it's got that reoccurring revenue. Everybody wants new ARR. Everybody wants that reoccurring revenue, subscription revenue, because that's what, how you build the company. So good model, few challenges, kind of disruptive depending on, the larger cloud players and, what's going on in the industry. As open source, it's freely available and a lot of people can disrupt you. Keep that in mind. Now, if you are a musician and you decide not to pursue one of these big, streaming services, or maybe you went in a time machine and went back 10 years ago, or perhaps you're doing it in addition to, what's available on the streaming systems, you would go back to selling something that is of value. So as a musician, there are a few different ways that you could potentially make money, right? So streaming and royalties aside for a second, let's talk specifically about albums, right? So CDs, cassettes, records, vinyl, digital downloads. When I listen to the radio, so I like, Foo Fighters, and I like, Seven Dust, and, Godsmack, and like, Papa Roach, all these bands. And I listen to Octane on Sirius XM radio. That's not a plug for them. I'm just saying I do most days. I can hear a lot of the songs that I like, but I can't hear all of them. Right? So if I want to hear the entire album, I want to hear the B-sides of something, I have to go physically either purchase or, go to a streaming service. So there are times when I will go buy or pre-order a certain artist's new album. Why do I do that? Well, number one, I want the media. I don't want to rent it. But they also sometimes offer exclusive songs, or maybe they do a behind-the-scenes look, or maybe they offer you some other perk that you can't get elsewhere. Okay, so I'll be able to listen to more of the songs than I can hear on the radio, or I can, also get some extra perks that I can't get anywhere else. Right? So that seems reasonable. And this is similar in the open source space to when you have an open core model, right? So you have a free version. You have the radio version that everyone can listen to, enjoy. Maybe you could even rip, some music to your machine, or, copy it to a cassette. The old cassette tapes that we used to, run around with. I'm waxing poetic about that. But, that free version is limited. You can only get what's available right now. Right? What's freely out there. And you might have to listen to commercials. You might have to do something else. But from an open source perspective, that free version is the open source that we're all using. And a lot of us build awesome applications around. So the idea of an open core version is you have that free version, but then you have an enterprise version. And so what's in the enterprise version? It varies from company to company. But the idea is you find the things that your core demographic are really interested in, and maybe a little nichey. The majority of the market doesn't necessarily need those items. Okay. So things maybe like certain security, things that are only for financial institutions, or maybe compliance. Big companies, enterprises have a lot of compliance regulations. So maybe there's certain features that are specific to compliance, or maybe partnerships like integrations with third-party tools that are big enterprisey, even proprietary tools that, hey, if you want to use these tools that are very specific to these enterprises, that's part of our enterprise offering. And it's not in the open source space. So it's called a dual license, where you've got two licenses. You've got the commercial license and you've got the open source license. And a lot of times it will have support included, other things, other perks, things like that. So if that makes sense. So the idea is similar to going and buying the physical media, listening to the radio, whatever. You're going to get the free version. And then if you want more, or if you need more, you want to get those additional perks, those additional things, you would pay for the enterprise version. This is a very standard model. It's been around for ages. Lots of companies have been successful on it. Many companies have this model as well as a cloud model. Some people are shutting down their open core models in favor of cloud. I think it's a little short-sighted, because there's a lot of big companies who want to run their own clouds and not be tied to yours. So keep that in mind as well. Now, if you are that musician and you haven't released, an album yet, or maybe nobody's buying your album, or you want to just get started and you can't afford recording time, what do you do? A lot of musicians start off in the wedding singer mold. Yes, they're doing that gig kind of economy. Maybe they're playing some weddings, maybe they're playing some proms, maybe they're playing some, festivals, things like that. Maybe they're opening for someone, but they're getting paid for their events, for their activities that they're doing. And, this is a model that a lot of musicians follow. This is kind of like that standard kind of entry level. If you're a musician, you're going to play a couple bars, you're going to play a couple, venues, that type of thing. But ultimately, you're going to work your way up, hopefully, and maybe you'll get like a residency somewhere. You'll become Celine Dion or something like that, where you'll be able to sit in Vegas and just play every week and get paid for it. You could, right? I mean, and again, what's interesting is none of these models are mutually exclusive, right? So a lot of artists, they could play private parties. They could have a residence in Vegas. They could also release albums, and they can do cloud. And you'll see a lot of open source companies do all three as well. From a service perspective in the open source space, the three big things that people do are consulting services, which is I'm going to help you accomplish something, right? I'm going to help you overcome something. So it's a one and done type of thing. Support, which is ongoing bug fixes, maintenance, answer questions, help people out, an expectation that when there's a problem, you're there to help. And then managed services. Now, managed services differs from the managed services in the cloud space a little bit. In the cloud space, it's all automatic, all generated by hand. You don't talk to people, right? And so I like to call it operationally managed. Whereas managed service here is very white glove. You have someone who is your DBA, a sysadmin, a DevOps engineer, somebody who's working with you, and maybe they spend 5-10 hours a week or some amount of time, helping with different things. So it's a very hybrid. And you can use the cloud services along with kind of that white glove service in conjunction with one another. And that's a very popular model as well. But from the services perspective, this is a very low barrier of entry. I mean, basically, if you've got, your ability to log in somewhere, you can help with consulting. You can charge consulting, right? So it is, however, limited in terms of revenue upside. There aren't a lot of large companies that, exceed, let's say, the 100 million mark in a pure service industry in the tech space. Outside of like the big kind of like consulting firms, which do business consulting and things like that, those are a little separate. But when we're talking about pure play consulting, technical software, open source type things, it's a very limited like upside. You can still make really good money and build a successful business off of it. It's just you're not going to get that 10x, 20x valuation off of a service-based business. Margins are typically pretty low because it's very people-centric. If you lose a person, that can impact your ability to deliver and impact your revenue stream because you're really selling people services. So, there you go. But if you are not doing gigs in the music space or in the open source space, what do you do? And so probably the most common and most prevalent kind of entry point is a lot of people who love the music or love open source, they start in a very similar space, right? And from a music perspective, you might see them as you walk down the street, you might see them, kind of like hanging out at, certain places. It's the people who are busking, right? It's the people who are out there. They love the music. They love playing, so they go out there and they hustle, they're doing it. They know that they don't have the money for the connections for a gig or for an album, but they're out there, they're trying to make it. And this is similar to the open source space where you have the donations kind of button, right? This is not going to lead to some sort of windfall of money. You're not going to get, even if you've got 1 million people who are using your software, you might get a few hundred who donate, right? The numbers are a really low conversion rate on these. But your goal here is typically sustainability. You just want to make sure that the project is taken care of. All right. And that means that, you're trying to make sure that hosting is taken care of. And maybe you can reward some engineers or send some people to conferences or, do some things to help the community out. But this is really a volume play, right? For donations to be successful, especially at bigger projects, you need to have lots and lots and lots of users. A lot of the programming languages can pull this off, right? Because there are so many users. For instance, Rust, right? So there can be big foundations at play here behind the scenes, where as that software becomes really prevalent across the industry, these new kind of entities can rise up. But this is a very organic play, and this one's very difficult to kind of move from just the busking kind of like hoping for enough to get a cup of coffee type of mentality to actually being able to employ people. Very few people can do this correctly, and a lot of foundations actually have pooled their resources together across multiple projects, and there are really successful large organizations that help some of these smaller projects. But how they work is they're going to pool together resources and accept donations across the board, and then kind of like divvy them up. And so you'll see like Linux Foundation, CNCF, Software Conservancy, Apache Foundation, things like that, where they are the home of these projects. But typically a lot of them won't necessarily pay directly for engineers, right? So they're not paying like a one-for-one. I'm paying this engineer. They'll help out projects with hosting or legal advice or other stuff like that. And it's something that it's a difficult model, but it really is not a business model. It's a not-for-profit. But I put it in here because a lot of people say, I can't get people to donate to my project, and I want to donate so I can work on this full time. It just doesn't happen that way. So if you are interested in more content like this, and you want a deeper dive into managing, building an open source business, and figuring out how to make money in open source, check out opensourcemetrics.org. I published a blog post, as well as I have a video of a presentation specifically on the guide to building an open source business. It's a much deeper dive than what I did here. And you can also check out the Hacking Open Source Business podcast, which we do weekly discussions with people in the open source business space, founders, executives, people in the community, where we try to talk to them about how they measure, how they build, and how they grow the adoption of their open source. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and hopefully this was educational. Leave some comments down and let me know what you'd like to see next.